Good morning, Algebra 1 class. All right. Solving equations by square roots. Guys, earlier in this unit, we solved equations by factoring. Then we solved equations using the quadratic formula. But now, we're going to solve equations by taking the square root. Now, guys, this is an interesting method, but what I like to tell people is only certain types of quadratic equations can be solved this way. If everybody knows by now that this is the standard form of a quadratic equation, okay? Now, to do factoring, it's got to be equal to 0. To do the quadratic formula, it's got to be equal to 0. But it doesn't have to be equal to 0 to do this method today, the square root method, okay? What does have to be true is this term right here has to be missing. You need a quadratic term, which is ax squared. And you need a constant, which could be over here, or it could be over here where the 0 is. But you cannot have an x that is to the first power. This is b times x to the first. This has to be missing. So as you can see right here, there is no part of this equation with just an x. There's an x squared, and there's a constant. So we know we can do the square root method. Now, what is a square root? Okay. Obviously, you know a square root looks like that. The opposite of something being squared, which means to the second power, is taking the square root. Okay? We talked about this a little bit when we were doing difference of squares problems on factoring. How when we wanted to know if 25x squared was a perfect square, we would try to take the square root of it, and we would get 5x. So we're going to be taking the square roots of things that are squared so that we can get rid of this exponent right here. What we're trying to do is get rid of an exponent. That's what we're trying to do. Okay? Now, so what do you think we should do? These are one-step equations because x squared is already by itself, so we should take the square root of both sides. Now, the square root of x squared is just x, and when you type the square root of 25 in your calculator, you get 5. However, there are two answers to this problem because the square root of x squared really equals plus or minus x, positive x or negative x. So then we do a little finagling here, and so that gives us x equals plus or minus 5. Okay? Now, this step right here, this is two answers. X is 5 and x is negative 5. Okay? So you might want to write it like that. X is 5, x equals negative 5. It's easier to understand when you write it this way. Now, this next one is tricky because 32 is not a perfect square. But here we get plus or minus x. Here we get the square root of 32. Now, let's put the plus or minus over here on the other side. X equals plus or minus the square root of 32. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and simplify this using my I'll do it in my head, but you'll probably use your calculator. The square root of 32 is 16 times 2. Square root of 16 is 4. So the answer ends up being 4 times the square root of 2. 4 times the square root of 2. And one of them's positive and one of them's negative. Since I'm out of room, I'm going to leave it written like that. But I could separate it into two answers. Okay? 4.5 minutes. All right. In these two-step equations, you have to get x squared by itself before you can take the square root. So I have to add 7 to each side. X squared equals 16. Now I can take the square root of both sides, and I get plus or minus x equals 4. Because 4 is the square root of 16. So that means x equals plus or minus 4. So x equals 4 and x equals negative 4. I had enough room to write 2 separate answers on this problem, so I wanted to just to remind you that this is 2 answers. It's positive 4 and it's negative 4. Okay. Get x squared by itself, minus 13. X squared equals negative 8. Hey.
Okay, I knocked out.
Okay. What number? I forget. Melanie? No.
Office.
420. Sorry. Pause. Okay, guys. Now something funny happened here. I took the square root of a negative, and I can't do that. Not in Algebra 1 anyway. Just like with the quadratic formula, when you get a negative under the square root, you're going to say no real solutions. So we're going to stop right there and say no real solutions. Don't say no solutions, because there are some imaginary solutions you're going to learn about in Algebra 2 in a couple years, okay? Okay, we got to get x squared by itself. We can't take the square root yet. A lot of people try, but please divide by 2 first. So you get x squared is equal to 7. Now that x squared is by itself, you take the square root of both sides, plus or minus x equals the square root of 7. So x equals plus or minus the square root of 7. Guys, we can't do anything with the square root of 7 except change it to a decimal. So I'm going to leave it like the square. I'm going to leave it as the square root of 7. Remember, this is 2 answers: positive square root of 7, negative square root of 7. All right, I'll let you do number 6 on your own. Now, usually when I say that, nobody does it. Please try to do number 6 on your own. If it's not done when you submit it online, I'm going to put incomplete, which means you get a 0. Okay? Do number 6 on your own. All right. Number 7. Now it's going to take several steps. Okay. First, I got to subtract 5 from both sides. This is just like solving regular equations until you get to the end. So this will be 405 equals 5v squared. You've been solving equations like this forever. It's just that the variable didn't have an exponent right here. So you really do the same thing you did in middle school math to solve this equation. Divide both sides by 5. You get v squared equals, that's 81. Yay. Now it's time to do what? You're exactly right. You take the square root of both sides. When you do that, you get plus or minus v equals 9. So that means v equals plus or minus 9. You can circle that right there as your answer, or you can come over here and write v equals 9 or v equals negative 9.
Can we please get a custodian to room 1116? A custodian to room 1116. Thank you.
All right. Now we get to some weird problems. Since the plus 3 is inside the parentheses of the square, we can't subtract 3 from both sides yet. This is one where we do have to take the square root right away, because we got to get rid of this 2 first, okay? So what do we get here? We get plus or minus x plus 3 equals square root of 1 is 1. Let's just take that plus or minus to the other side. So x plus 3 equals plus or minus 1. Ooh, they should have given us more room for this. So, guys, this is 2 equations here. I'm going to solve x plus 3 equals positive 1, and I'm going to solve x plus 3 equals negative 1. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. Minus 3, x equals negative 2. And over here, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. X equals negative 4. So there's my 2 answers. X equals negative 2 and x equals -4. This one, I'm at 10 minutes. I'm going to try to finish up here. We have to divide by 4 first. Ooh-wee, this is a tough problem. So you get x minus 10 squared equals 25 over 4. Now, notice that 25 and 4 are both perfect squares because right now when I take the square root of both sides, I get x minus 10 plus or minus equals square root of 25 is 5 and the square root of 4 is 2. Now guys, you know I've been putting the plus or minus over here every time and then moving it over here every time, so I'm just going to put plus or minus 5 over 2. Now the last thing I have to do, and I'm going to have to go down below here, is I have to write two equations. X minus 10 equals 5 over 2, or you know what, 2.5. Why not? Let's change it to a decimal. And x minus 10 equals negative 2.5. Now let's add 10 to both sides. Guys, I was able to change this to a decimal because I didn't have to round it off. If you have to round it off, then don't change it to a decimal is what I'm saying. Plus 10 plus 10, x equals 7.5, I believe. So my two answers are x equals 12.5 and x equals 7.5. Right? So I'm at 12 minutes. If you would like to try these problems because you're a go-getter, then try these problems. And when you submit your notes online, if I see all three of these problems done, it'll be valuable. You're going to get a Z. You're going to get incomplete if you don't have number 6 done. If you get 9 and 11 done, you might, I don't know, I might give you a little bit higher grade if Canvas will allow me to give bonus points. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop the video now. Good luck.